My name is Margaret Langston, 68 years old, a retired financial advisor who spent 4 decades turning numbers into security and clients into millionaires. I built my fortune quietly through patience, ethics, and compound interest. What I didn't know was that my own son and his wife were studying compound betrayal. The night it happened, the ocean looked calm, too calm. The yacht's lights shimmered against the black water like scattered diamonds. Laughter floated through the deck, my son Andrew, his wife Brianna, a handful of their glossy friends holding glasses of champagne that probably cost less than my patience. Brianna, in her silk dress, leaned toward me with that polished influencer smile. "Margaret, come closer to the railing," she said sweetly. "You should see the reflection of the moon. It's beautiful tonight." I moved forward, the sea breeze sharp and cold. Her perfume, coconut, and deceit lingered in the air. Then, in a tone soft enough to slice through flesh, she whispered, "Say hi to the sharks." 2 hands pressed against my back, a sudden push. The world tilted. For half a second, I saw my son standing there frozen, not horrified, not surprised, just smiling. Then the water swallowed me whole. The ocean is not gentle at night. It is a beast that roars beneath its own silence. I hit the surface hard. Pain shot up my chest. The yacht's light drifted farther away until it became a star one that no longer belonged to my sky. I tried to shout Andrew's name, but salt water rushed into my mouth. Waves spun me around, dragging me under. I kicked, gasping lungs burning. Through the chaos, one thought pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. They did it. My own blood did this. For years, I'd built everything to protect them. The business, the properties, the investments. I'd trusted Andrew to learn patience, not greed. I was wrong. My voiceover came in sharp and calm, the way my clients used to describe my reports. They thought salt water would dissolve everything, even memory. They were wrong. Cold. That's all I remember. The kind of cold that steals seconds from your life. I floated for hours, clinging to a stray piece of driftwood from the yacht's deck. At some point, I must have blacked out. When I opened my eyes, the ceiling above me was white and humming. The rhythmic beep of a monitor filled the room. Hospital. A man in a navy jacket with salt-streaked hair sat beside me, sipping coffee. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Name's Captain Brooks. My crew found you around 2 miles off the coast. You're lucky we were hauling nets that way." "Lucky," I repeated, voice rasped raw. "That's one word for it." He gave me a sympathetic half-smile. "Do you remember what happened?" I stared out the small window. Beyond it, the sea stretched out like a secret I wasn't ready to share. "I fell," I said flatly. His brow furrowed. He didn't believe me, but he didn't press. Hours later, alone in the hospital room, I stared at the IV line in my arm. The air smelled of antiseptic and irony. Beside the bed, a nurse left my handbag found floating near the wreckage. Inside was my phone, miraculously dry. When I turned it on, a notification blinked: Langston Holdings account transfer completed, authorized by Andrew Langston. My pulse steadied, not spiked. Decades of reading markets had trained me for this, when to panic and when to play dead. I leaned back, whispering to the quiet room, "They stole my yacht. I'll take their empire." The nurse returned, checking the monitors. "You should rest, Mrs. Langston. You're safe now." "Safe?" I smiled faintly. "I'm awake." "That's better." As she left, the TV flickered to a local news channel. Footage of the same yacht, my yacht, appeared on screen. A reporter stood near the marina announcing that a tragic accident had taken the life of philanthropist Margaret Langston during a family celebration. The segment showed Andrew and Brianna crying before cameras holding hands. Brianna's voice trembled perfectly. "We're devastated. She was everything to us." I laughed. Not loud, just a single sharp breath. "Good performance," I muttered. "The Oscars call tomorrow." Night fell again. The sound of waves outside my window mixed with the slow ticking of the wall clock. I turned my head toward the reflection. Pale, skin-bruised eyes, a faint scar on my temple. I looked alive, and that, for now, was my greatest advantage. Pulling the blanket higher, I whispered the only words that made sense in a world that suddenly didn't. They think I'm gone. Perfect. At dawn, Captain Brooks returned. Insurance people called. Said your yacht's ownership's being contested already. I thought you should know. I smiled thinly. Of course. Paperwork travels faster than grief. He hesitated. What are you going to do next? I looked out toward the sea, the sunlight breaking across the horizon like the start of a ledger's first page. Captain, I said, voice steady, do you believe in revenge? He chuckled softly. No, ma'am, but I believe in balance. I nodded. So do I. Later, as the discharge papers printed, I reached for the pen. My hands didn't shake. For a woman declared dead 12 hours earlier, I felt more alive than I had in years. Outside the hospital doors, the sea wind hit my face again, sharp, honest, and unforgiving. Each breath carried salt and resolve. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the waves fill the silence. Then quietly, I said what had become my promise. They stole my yacht. I'll take their empire. And with that, I walked toward the sun, leaving footprints that the tide would never erase. The morning light poured through the hospital blinds, soft but merciless, the kind of light that exposes every detail you've been trying to ignore. My discharge papers lay neatly on the table next to a glass of lukewarm water and a pill cup labeled pain management. The nurse had left my belongings, my coat, a small leather notebook, and the battered phone that had survived the ocean. I scrolled through the notifications again. Another email time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. Subject, Langston Holdings Transfer Confirmation. Body, dear Mrs. Langston. The ownership transfer of Langston Biopharma to Mr. Andrew Langston has been successfully executed. Thank you for your trust. Trust. The word stung more than the IV needle. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred into one long wound. My thumb hovered over the sender's address, the same law firm I'd founded 30 years ago with my late husband Richard, the same firm that used to send me flowers every year on our anniversary. Now it sent me confirmation of my own erasure. I laughed, quiet but sharp. Guess I'm allergic to betrayal, I muttered. The nurse peeked in. Everything all right, Mrs. Langston Perfect, I said with a smile so calm it frightened even me. I just realized I'm worth more dead than alive. By noon, I was sitting in a cafe across from the marina, hair tied back, coat buttoned, pretending to be another widow waiting for the ferry. I wasn't waiting for the ferry. I was waiting for Mr. Chen. He arrived exactly at 12:03, so punctual as always. Slim gray suit eyes like polished steel. The kind of man who could tell a lie from the weight of its paperwork. Margaret, he said quietly, sliding into the seat across from me. You're supposed to be dead. Good, I replied. Then nobody will expect me to pay for lunch. He cracked the faintest smile. I saw the reports, the accident, the funeral plans. They moved quickly. They always did, I said, stirring my tea, even when it came to betrayal. Mr. Chen placed a folder on the table, discreet brown, unmarked. Before you disappeared, your son visited me. He said you'd asked him to handle your estate planning while you were on the cruise. And you believed him. He shook his head. I believed your signature. It looked authentic, until I compared it to one of your old trusts. He opened the folder. Inside were printed documents, a new will, a durable power of attorney, and a transfer of control for Langston Biopharma, all neatly dated 2 weeks ago, all bearing my name. My hand trembled not from fear but recognition. The ink, the spacing, even the flourish on the letter M, perfect. Too perfect. I whispered Andrew couldn't have done this. He never even balanced his own checkbook. Which means Brianna did, Chen said flatly. She had access to your archives, didn't she? The ones you kept in your office vault? She was cataloging them for a family history project. He gave a humorless chuckle. History indeed. We sat in silence for a moment. The sound of seagulls outside cut through the tension like static. Finally, I said, "What do we do?" Chen leaned in. We start by pretending to do nothing. Let them think they've won. In the meantime, I'll pull every transaction tied to your holding company, offshore accounts, signatures, timestamps. The forgery can be proven, but we'll need the original voice authorization they sent to the bank. Voice authorization. He nodded. When they moved the control of Langston Biopharma, someone had to verify by phone. If we get that audio file, they're finished. He smiled faintly. That's my client. That night, I checked into a small coastal inn under the name Marjorie Lane, a quiet alias I'd once used when buying property in Maine. The room smelled of cedar and salt. On the bedside table, a single lamp cast a yellow glow across my notebook. I began writing not out of nostalgia, but necessity. Every date, every call, every odd interaction from the past month. Brianna's insistence on helping me pack for the cruise. Andrew's sudden interest in my health insurance, the way he kept asking if I'd updated my password vault. Piece by piece, the puzzle turned into a confession neither of them had spoken aloud. The next morning, I went to my old office, or rather what used to be mine. The Langston Biopharma building gleamed like a glass cathedral downtown. My name had already been scrubbed from the plaque. At the reception desk, a young assistant looked up, startled. "Mrs. Langston? I thought dead." I smiled. "Yes, I'm bad at staying that way." She flushed, whispering, "They told us not to expect you. I like surprising people." She hesitated, then handed me a small padded envelope. This came the day after the accident. I kept it, just in case. I thanked her and left before the cameras caught me. Outside, I tore the seal. Inside was a USB drive, no label. I plugged it into my phone adapter at a nearby bench. Static. Then a voice, Brianna's unmistakable. "Let's make it look like an accident. It'll be cleaner that way." The recording was short, grainy, but enough to freeze the air in my lungs. Her laugh followed light and cruel. I sat back feeling the cold metal of the bench under my palms. People passed by laughing, unaware that the woman in the gray coat was holding a bomb, not of fire, but of proof. That evening, I met Chen again at a small pier lit by orange street lamps. I handed him the drive. He didn't speak for a while after listening, just exhaled. "Well," he said, finally, "that's not a smoking gun, Margaret. That's a missile." I smirked. "I told you I don't miss targets." He looked at me with something between admiration and pity. "You know what happens when this goes public, right? This will destroy them." I met his eyes. "No, Mr. Chen. They destroyed themselves. I'm just filing the paperwork." Back in my room, I poured a glass of water and stared at the dark ocean through the window. The waves reflected the same rhythm as my heartbeat, calm, deliberate, patient. For years, I'd taught clients the golden rule of investment: never react, anticipate. Now I was about to apply it to something far more personal. In the silence, I opened my notebook and wrote the final line for the day they forged my will. But I'm the one rewriting their fate. The little cottage by the harbor was smaller than any place I'd lived in my life. 2 rooms, a kettle that hissed louder than my conscience, and a window view of seagulls arguing over breadcrumbs. But it was quiet. And quiet, I was learning, was the most expensive luxury in the world. After everything, the ocean, the betrayal, the forged will silence felt foreign, like wearing someone else's coat, warm but not quite mine. Each morning I brewed coffee on the small stove, watched boats drift in, and made a promise to myself: no revenge today, just recovery. Of course, that promise usually lasted until lunch. I first met Noah Whitman on a Tuesday, which in my experience is the day the universe schedules all its accidents. He knocked on my door with the confidence of someone selling solar panels. Instead, he was holding a laptop half dismantled. "Mrs. Langston?" he asked. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Noah Langston Foundation Scholarship Class of 2023. I blinked. "You're the one who turned an art grant into a robotics project, aren't you?" He grinned sheepishly. "That's me, and you're the woman who paid for it." "Well, don't remind me," I said, half smiling. "I might ask for a refund." He laughed, stepping inside. "The harbor manager said you needed someone who knows tech. Your Wi-Fi's broadcasting from 2009 and your laptop thinks Facebook is still cool." "I'm retired," I said dryly. "So is my hardware." Noah worked quietly, surrounded by cables and the faint smell of burnt dust. Every few minutes he'd hum something cheerful, something that made the air less heavy. When he was done, he turned the screen toward me. There. Faster. Cleaner. And I installed encrypted storage in case someone tries to snoop. I raised an eyebrow. You mean like my son? He froze, unsure whether to laugh. I did it for him. Relax, I said, sipping my tea. If I can survive being pushed off a yacht, I can survive a password reset. For the next few days, Noah stopped by every afternoon. He brought groceries, helped fix the heater, and somehow convinced me to join something I'd sworn never to touch again, social media. Why on earth would I need Instagram? I protested. To keep an eye on them, he said simply. People your son's age post everything they shouldn't. I gave him a look. You think I'll spy on them through hashtags? He grinned. You'd be surprised what betrayal looks like in HD. So I let him teach me. It took an entire pot of tea, 3 muffins, and an alarming amount of patience from both of us. But by evening, my profile was live Aram land seaside. Profile picture a sailboat at sunset. Congratulations, Noah said, clapping once. You're officially online. Wonderful, I deadpanned. Now teach me how to weaponize it. Comedy unfolded naturally. My first attempt at a story post accidentally included a close-up of my elbow. Abstract art, I declared. Noah laughed so hard he nearly dropped his phone. Then he showed me the search bar. Here, type your son's name. I hesitated. Feels invasive. You're dead, remember, he said with mock seriousness. Dead people don't stalk. They research. That made me snort. If lies go viral, so will justice. Scrolling felt like opening a wound I didn't know still bled. Andrew's profile was full of curated grief. Photos of him lighting candles, Brianna posing beside a framed portrait of me cropped just enough to hide her smirk. The caption read, "Honoring my mother-in-law, the woman who taught me grace." Grace. She had pushed Grace into the ocean. I scrolled further. A video appeared, bright lights, champagne glasses, floral arches. The text overlay read, "Charity Gala in memory of Margaret Langston." Guests clapped. A host announced donations to continue her legacy. At the center stood Brianna, radiant in white, waving to the crowd. Behind her, a giant banner shimmered, "The Langston Foundation, because love never dies." I leaned back, almost amused. Voiceover in my mind came cold measured, I was dead. Conveniently. Noah peeked over my shoulder. That's her and she's using your name for PR, of course. She always needed something of mine to look important. He frowned. What are you going to do? I closed the laptop slowly. Absolutely nothing. Yet. He didn't believe me, which meant he was smarter than he looked. That night after Noah left, I sat by the window with the laptop open again. The harbor lights blinked in the distance, small and honest. I clicked through more posts, hundreds of likes, thousands of comments, words like inspirational, devoted, family, philanthropic vision. The internet had turned their crime into a fairy tale. And yet, watching it all play out from my small, quiet room, I felt oddly calm. It wasn't rage this time. It was recognition, the kind that settles deep in your bones and whispers, they're writing their own downfall. All I have to do is edit. A few days later, Noah stopped by again. He'd brought flowers, daisies, the inexpensive kind that lasted longer than promises. Thought your place could use some color, he said. I smiled, arranging them in an empty coffee jar. Cheap, cheerful, and impossible to kill. You do know my taste. He grinned. How's the internet world treating you? Enlightening, I said. Apparently I've been dead for 2 weeks, but I still trend better than most of them. He laughed. That's the spirit. We spent the afternoon chatting, half mentorship, half therapy. Noah told me about his dream to start a nonprofit for tech education. I told him about markets risk and the one thing money can't buy time. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me. You know, Mrs. Langston, maybe this isn't the end of your story. Maybe it's the rebrand. I raised an eyebrow. Rebrand, yeah. Every legend gets rewritten once in a while. After he left, I poured myself a cup of tea and looked at the harbor again. Seagulls circled lazily above the water. Somewhere in the distance, a ship's horn echoed deep and steady. I thought about what Noah said, about rebranding, about rebirth. Maybe he was right. I'd already died once, at least officially. What harm was there in coming back under my own terms? I typed a new caption under the photo of the sea and hit post. Sometimes the tide takes what's broken. Sometimes it returns what's ready. The screen glowed for a moment, then dimmed. I leaned back, letting the hum of the waves fill the silence. For the first time in weeks, the quiet didn't feel like exile. It felt like power. By the time the sun rose over the harbor, the quiet of my little cottage had turned into a war room. The kettle whistled, the printer hummed, and on the table between me and Mr. Chen lay three things: a stack of legal documents, a laptop full of encrypted files, and a single phrase written in my notebook, the Langston Reclamation Project. Mr. Chen adjusted his glasses and said, "You've always had a gift for dramatic branding. Call it poetic justice," I replied. "They used my name for a fake charity. I'll use it to rebuild my empire." He gave a dry chuckle. "All right then, Mrs. Langston. Let's start by reclaiming the truth." We began with the marina's security footage. Mr. Chen had a contact at the Port Authority, a retired investigator who still owed him a favor. By evening, he sent us a drive labeled Marina East Dock, July 14, 21 hours. We loaded the footage. The grainy screen flickered to life. There it was, my yacht, the Serafina, gliding into the dark. I could see myself boarding, followed by Andrew and Brianna. An hour later, the yacht returned lighter. One less passenger. The camera zoomed just enough to capture their faces. Andrew's hand gripping Brianna's waist. Brianna leaning in to whisper something, smiling. Mr. Chen paused the video. Enhance the audio. I shook my head. We don't need to hear it. I remember every word. Next came the paper trail. Mr. Chen was methodical, ruthless in his precision. Within 48 hours, he'd gathered every record tied to my holdings: yacht registration, fuel receipts, marina payments, even catering invoices. "See here," he said, tapping one receipt, "all post-dated. They planned your death days in advance. And the insurance claim I asked." He smiled grimly. "Filed the morning after the incident. Brianna's name appears as beneficiary, though legally it should have defaulted to the trust. So they didn't just try to kill me," I murmured. "They tried to bill me for it." 3 days later, we had enough evidence to fill a courtroom. But I didn't want a courtroom. Not yet. I wanted strategy. I wanted precision. I wanted silence. That night, as we sat in the dim light of the cottage, I said the words that would define everything that came next. No blood, just signatures. Mr. Chen looked up. I mean we use their own greed against them. Paperwork brought me here. Paperwork will bury them." The next step was tracing where the money had gone. Mr. Chen's firm still had limited access to the company's ledgers through an old client portal I'd built years ago. We logged in using one of my inactive credentials. Rows of transactions appeared, millions moving through shell accounts, each more suspicious than the last. Luma Holdings Chen said, reading from the screen. A private investment vehicle registered in the Cayman Islands. Andrew's name doesn't appear, but the signatures match his. "Shell within a shell," I said, quietly. "Classic amateur play." He smirked. "You raised a cunning son," I corrected him. "I raised an entitled one." We spent the next few hours tracing transfers, dissecting fake subsidiaries, and connecting the dots. Luma Holdings wasn't alone. It linked to 6 other entities, all siphoning from Langston Biopharma's research accounts, millions disguised as consulting fees. When I saw the total number, $402 billion, I exhaled through my teeth. Mr. Chen whistled. "That's quite a sum to misplace." I smiled thinly. It's easier to steal from an empire than to build one. But he forgot one thing. "And what's that?" I built a fortress. He built a sandcastle. We formalized the plan that night. Phase 1 documentation. Every lie leaves a footprint. We'd track each one until the story told itself. Phase 2, diversion. Feed them misinformation. Let them think I was hunting smaller targets. Insurance fraud, property theft, while the real trap built underneath. Phase 3, revelation. Public exposure through their own channels. The same social media Brianna used for fake charity galas would become the theater of her undoing. Mr. Chen nodded slowly. You're not planning revenge, Mrs. Langston. You're planning a hostile takeover. Semantics, I said, sipping my tea. Both require precision and good timing. In the days that followed, my quiet life became a flurry of hidden operations. Noah helped set up a secure cloud system, digital breadcrumbs he called it, where every piece of evidence was stored with redundant backups. I watched him work from across the table, young, loyal, untainted by greed, exactly the kind of son I once hoped to have. Why are you doing this, Noah? I asked one evening. He looked up, thoughtful. Because you once paid my tuition without asking for anything back. Maybe it's my turn to repay that debt. I smiled. Then make sure you keep receipts. I'm very big on documentation. One afternoon, while reviewing account logs, Mr. Chen froze mid-sentence. Look at this. He zoomed in on a transaction entry dated the same week as my death. Transfer memo, posthumous asset realignment. Luma Holdings. Posthumous, I repeated. They didn't even wait for the obituary to dry. Chen's tone hardened. The bank that authorized this transfer is in Singapore. It's offshore laundering, but sloppy. We can reverse it with the right trigger proof of life. Proof of life, I mused. That's poetic. He looked at me. You really plan to stay dead, don't you? For now, I said. The dead make fewer mistakes. As night fell, I stood by the window again, staring out at the ocean. The tide rolled in like breathing, steady, relentless, inevitable. For weeks, I'd been rebuilding quietly. Now it was time to move. I opened my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote at the top the blueprint below it. Line by line, I listed everything that would reclaim what was mine. Bank reversal requests, internal audit reports, offshore leak contacts, social media exposure schedule. At the bottom, I added one final line, justice is not revenge, it's arithmetic. Mr. Chen looked up from his computer. Once this begins, you can't stop it. There'll be no going back. I have no interest in going back, I said, only forward. He nodded slowly. Then let's build your fortress again. I smiled the same calm, patient smile I once wore in boardrooms when sealing 9-figure deals. The same smile that terrified competitors. Not a fortress, Mr. Chen, I said, turning toward the sea. This time, we build a storm. The first rule of infiltration I discovered is that no one ever looks directly at the help. The second rule, a wig, a limp, and a bad posture, can hide more secrets than a vault. By the end of that week, Margaret Langston, CEO and founder, had officially died a second time, this time as herself. In her place stood Maggie Lane, a 70-something gardener with arthritis, a southern accent, and a resume printed on coffee-stained paper. Mr. Chen had arranged everything: forged references, background checks, and even a prepaid phone registered to a non-existent niece. Brianna had posted an ad online housekeeper needed for light gardening and plant care. Discretion a must. Discretion, I thought, smiling. She was practically begging for me. When I arrived at my mansion, the woman who opened the door was wearing silk pajamas and a face mask that cost more than most people's rent. You must be Maggie, Brianna said without looking up from her phone. Yes, ma'am, I rasped, feigning a soft tremor in my voice. Just Maggie'll do. Fine. Maggie, follow me. Don't touch anything that looks expensive, which for reference is everything. She strutted ahead, her perfume trailing like arrogance in a bottle. I followed, biting my tongue, as we passed through the marble foyer I had designed myself 15 years ago. The smell of white lilies and betrayal hung in the air. In the living room, the grand piano gleamed under the sunlight. On top of it sat a framed photo of me. Brianna had draped a black ribbon across it. My own funeral decoration turned into interior design. How nice, I said aloud, dusting the frame with deliberate care. Is she someone you knew? Brianna snorted. That's my husband's mother. She was complicated. Was I asked, feigning innocence? She died. Tragic boating accident. Left us everything. Everything, huh? I murmured. Lucky you. She didn't hear me, or rather she didn't listen. People like Brianna rarely did. My official duties included watering plants, cleaning terraces, and keeping out of sight. Unofficially, I was documenting every sound that came out of her mouth. Noah had rigged my phone with a discreet recording app that activated on keywords like transfer account and Cayman. He called it Grandma Surveillance Mode. Try to sound normal when you talk, he'd said. Normal for me, I replied, is what got me thrown off a yacht. Brianna was oblivious. She'd bark orders at me while on speakerphone with her associates. Yes, make sure Luma Holdings processes the final payment by Friday, she said one afternoon, pacing around in heels that clicked like gunfire on marble. If the Cayman auditors ask questions, tell them it's a pharmaceutical licensing fee. I bent over a fern beside her, pretending to prune leaves, the tiny microphone hidden under my gardening glove, blinking faintly. Her voice grew sharper. I don't care how suspicious it looks once the last transfer's done, it's all ours. She laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but the kind of brittle champagne-soaked sound that only greed can make. That night, in the small quarters they'd assigned me, formerly my guest room, I replayed the audio. Her words came out clear as glass. Once the last transfer's done, it's all ours. I looked around at the walls I'd painted, the curtains I'd chosen, the floorboards I'd polished with my own hands decades ago. Now every surface felt foreign. It was like being haunted by my own life. Voiceover in my head whispered, "Funny thing about greed, it never whispers. It shouts." The following morning brought its share of comedy, the universe's way of keeping me from snapping her neck with a rose pruner. I was trimming hydrangeas when Brianna appeared in a robe sipping her smoothie. "Morning, old lady," she said. I looked up deadpan. "You talking to me or your mirror?" She blinked, unamused. "You're funny. I'm alive," I said under my breath. "That's close enough." Later that afternoon, while she hosted a meeting on the patio, I carried trays of lemonade, keeping my head low. Andrew was there, too. My son in the flesh, wearing the same watch I'd given him for his graduation. He looked older, thinner, and yet somehow smaller. Their conversation was casual, clinical, like two surgeons discussing an operation they'd already performed. Andrew said, "After this last transaction clears, we'll dissolve the trust completely. Cayman accounts will take care of the rest." Brianna smirked. "We'll be ghosts. Rich ones." I set down the tray, my hands steady despite the rage. Every word they said recorded. Every lie preserved. That night when they went out for dinner, I slipped into the study. The same oak desk where Richard and I had built our empire now reeked of perfume and deceit. I turned on my phone's flashlight and began searching through drawers. Bank ledgers, travel receipts, offshore correspondence, all printed, unsigned, but traceable. I found a single envelope marked Luma Holdings, Final Transfer Authorization. Inside notarized documents with a signature forged to look like mine. I took photos of every page, evidence layered like armor. Then, as I turned to leave, I heard the faint buzz of Brianna's voice from the hallway. She was back early. I ducked behind the curtain. Through the small slit, I watched her enter, humming off-key. She placed her phone on speaker, talking to someone. "Yes, everything's set," she said. "The gardener's useless but harmless, probably half-deaf. We'll finish the last transfer tomorrow morning." I smiled behind the curtain. Half-deaf, maybe. Half-dead, definitely not. She leaned against the desk, the same desk where my fingerprints still lived, and said, "Once it's done, Andrew and I are leaving this house forever. It'll just be an asset, not a memory." Then, with the arrogance of the doomed, she laughed again. After she left, I emerged from hiding, whispering to the empty room, "Good," because I planned to move back in. I sat down at the desk, pulled out my notebook, and wrote a new entry under the blueprint Operation Imposter. Evidence obtained. They brag, I record. Tomorrow, trap set. Later, as I reviewed the recordings with Mr. Chen over the phone, he said, "You're playing a dangerous game, Margaret. I invented the game," I replied. He sighed. "You know what this sounds like? What a dark comedy written by someone who refuses to die." I chuckled softly. "Exactly. Let's give it a sequel." That night, as the waves lapped gently outside the mansion's balcony, I sat in the shadows of my old home, my hair tied up apron still on recorder hidden in my pocket. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a victim or a ghost. I felt like what I truly was, an architect of consequences. And when Brianna's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs, I whispered to the darkness, "Keep laughing, darling. Tomorrow the whole world will hear it too. Every empire, no matter how golden it looks, eventually burns from the inside out. And as fate would have it, mine was about to catch fire under their names, not mine." That Saturday, the Langston mansion shimmered like a diamond about to crack. Spotlights swept across the front lawn, waiters carried trays of champagne, and the sign out front read in cursive gold, "The Langston Empire, a legacy reborn." Brianna had spared no expense to celebrate what she believed was her ultimate victory. Inside, the chandeliers gleamed, the orchestra tuned their strings, and the cameras rolled for her live-streamed gala, a night of gratitude and philanthropy, as she called it. What she didn't know was that gratitude wasn't the only thing going live that night. Across town in the same harbor cafe where I'd first met Captain Brooks, a different kind of launch was happening. Mr. Chen sat beside me, so laptop open calm as a man defusing a bomb. The digital clock on his screen ticked towards 7:45 p.m. "You're sure the files will reach both the SEC and Detective Ruiz simultaneously?" I asked. He nodded. "Encrypted, timestamped with verifiable metadata. Once they open the email, it auto-forwards to every regulatory and law enforcement contact on our list. They'll have to act tonight." Captain Brooks sipped his beer, watching us with amusement. And here I thought the fireworks were scheduled for July. "Consider this an early show," I said, smiling faintly. Meanwhile, in the mansion, the show had already begun. Brianna stood on stage beneath a massive portrait of herself and Andrew, her voice honeyed through the microphone. "Tonight," she said, "we honor innovation, legacy, and family. The Langston Empire has always stood for integrity." I nearly choked on my tea when I heard that word, integrity. The livestream comments were already flooding in. "So inspiring, such a strong couple. True class." And then, like a conductor raising her baton, I nodded to Mr. Chen. He hit send. What followed was silent, invisible, and devastating. The evidence we'd compiled, the offshore transfers, the false insurance claims, the forged will, the recordings of Brianna bragging shot across the digital world like guided missiles. Within seconds, the FBI's Cyber Division and the SEC's Financial Crimes Task Force were pinging the same file from different networks. Detective Carla Ruiz, the only honest cop left from my husband's days, was already en route. Back at the gala, Brianna continued her speech, unaware her empire was collapsing in real time. She raised her glass camera lights, flashing. "To family, by blood, by choice, and by legacy." Andrew smiled beside her, forced and fragile. I could tell from the feed he was cracking. The man had never been built for pressure. He only knew how to inherit, not endure. Brianna leaned close, whispering something in his ear that made him stiffen. No doubt she was promising control. The irony was control had already changed hands. At exactly 8:07 p.m., the live stream glitched. For 2 seconds, the video froze. When it resumed, Brianna's words were overlapped by a different voice, hers, but recorded days earlier. "Once the last transfer's done, it's all ours," the crowd murmured. Andrew's face drained of color. She stammered, That's not." But the room erupted with whispers, phones rising like a forest of judgment. And then came the real interruption. 2 black SUVs pulling up the circular driveway. The first agents through the door were calm, deliberate, unshakable. Dark suits, badges, the gleam of authority. FBI one shouted, "Everyone stay where you are." The orchestra stopped mid-note. The champagne flute in Brianna's hand slipped shattering against the marble floor. Guests gasped. Some screamed. Others, ever the opportunists, started recording. The live stream, still rolling, captured everything. Ma'am said, one agent stepping forward, "Brianna Langston, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud identity, falsification, and money laundering." Across town in our harbor hideout, Captain Brooks laughed so hard he nearly fell off his stool. "Look at her face," he wheezed, watching the live stream replay on his tablet. Like someone just told her the stock market closed early. I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Funny, isn't it? They built their fortune on lies and live streams. Seems only fair both expose them. Mr. Chen closed the laptop. Detective Ruiz just confirmed the warrants. Luma Holdings has been frozen. The offshore accounts are locked pending investigation. Good, I said softly. Then the fireworks have begun. Back at the mansion, chaos unfolded like theater. Guests scrambled, reporters streamed in through the open doors, and the once polished marble floors became a battlefield of heels and broken glass. Andrew tried to shield Brianna, his hands trembling. "This is a mistake. My mother, she left everything to us." Detective Ruiz stepped into the frame, calm and unflinching. "Your mother's alive, Mr. Langston, and she left us plenty of evidence." The crowd gasped again. Someone shouted, "Alive!" And for the briefest moment, Brianna's mask shattered. Her eyes widened, not in guilt, but in disbelief that the dead could fight back. I paused the live stream there just as two agents took her by the arms. The screen froze on that perfect image, Brianna's mouth open, mid-scream, flashbulbs exploding like lightning around her. If poetic justice had a photograph, this was it. Outside fireworks from a nearby wedding erupted into the night sky, reflecting over the bay like a coronation. Captain Brooks raised his bottle toward the window. "Well, cheers to poetic timing." "Cheers to irony," I said. Mr. Chen smiled. "What happens next?" I leaned back, exhaling the satisfaction I'd waited months for. They'll come after Andrew. The money trail leads straight to him. But I'm not done yet. I don't just want them punished. I want them remembered as the cautionary tale they are. Brooks nodded approvingly. "You always did think bigger than the rest of us." The live stream ended with a news ticker already forming at the bottom of the screen, "Breaking Langston Empire under investigation for international fraud scheme." I closed the laptop, letting the silence fill the cafe again. The faint echo of distant fireworks rolled through the harbor, symbolic fitting final. I stood brushing the crumbs from my coat and said quietly, "Funny thing about greed, it always wants to be seen. I just gave it the audience it deserved." Then I turned to Mr. Chen and Brooks, my allies, my last witnesses to this strange resurrection. "Gentlemen," I said, "shall we prepare Act Two?" The walls of the federal holding room were the color of regret, a gray that didn't judge but didn't forgive either. I stood there clutching the visitor badge clipped to my coat, listening to the steady hum of fluorescent lights above me. It wasn't the first time I'd seen Andrew behind glass, but it was the first time he looked like the child I used to know. Not the man who stole my name, not the heir who drowned me in paperwork, but the boy who once brought me daisies from the backyard and said, "For your office, Mom, so it smells like home." Now even his scent was gone. All that remained was silence. A guard opened the door. "Mrs. Langston, you have 10 minutes. Andrew sat on the other side of the table, his wrists bare. No watch, no ring, no confidence. He looked up slowly, eyes bloodshot, lips pressed tight as if holding back a storm. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on the single syllable. I took the seat opposite him. "Andrew." He leaned forward, both elbows on the metal table. I didn't know it would go this far. "Fraud," I said calmly. "Forgery. Attempted homicide." "Which part surprises you exactly?" His face collapsed under the weight of my words. "I just wanted to prove I could be you," he whispered. For a moment, everything inside me went still. That one sentence, raw, trembling, pathetic, pierced through the armor I'd spent months building. I looked at him closely, not as the woman he betrayed, but as the mother who'd once believed he'd make the world kinder. "You could have," I said softly, "if you hadn't tried to erase me first." He flinched as if struck. The silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. Through the small window, I could see the courtyard outside, gray sky, bare trees, a few fallen leaves swirling in the wind. He rubbed his face with shaking hands. "It wasn't supposed to be this way. Brianna, she said the company would collapse without new capital. She said you'd already retired." I let out a slow breath. "So she whispered, and you stopped listening to yourself. I thought I was fixing everything." His voice cracked again. Dad always said I wasn't tough enough. You said I was too quick to please people. I wanted to prove I could lead. I met his eyes. Leadership isn't theft, Andrew. It's stewardship. And you mistook greed for growth. He bowed his head, the first tear hitting the steel table like a confession. For the first time since the yacht, I saw something real in him, the boy I'd buried under disappointment. The one who stayed up late helping me label files for the foundation, who used to say, "One day, I'll run this place for you." He had, just not in the way either of us imagined. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small velvet box. The guard tensed until I opened it, slowly revealing a silver watch, my late husband's engraved on the back with 3 words, "Keep your bearings." Andrew's breath caught. "That's Dad's." "Yes," I said. "He wore it the day we founded Langston Biopharma, the day you were born. He used to say this watch reminded him that time runs only one way." I slid it across the table toward him. He didn't touch it. "Why are you giving me this?" "So you remember," I said. "Every minute counts, even the ones you wasted trying to become someone you're not." He reached for it, then slowly, as if afraid it would burn him. When his fingers brushed the metal, something in him cracked open. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It was the kind of apology that came from a man who'd finally run out of lies. For everything. For her. For the company. For you. I nodded. "Apologies don't fix what's broken, Andrew, but they tell me the break was human." He wiped his face, voice shaking. "What happens now?" "You cooperate," I said. "You tell the truth completely. You help the investigation. And maybe one day you start living like a man your father would have recognized." He nodded slowly, staring down at the watch, ticking softly between us. A rhythm. A heartbeat. A reminder. For a moment, I let my hand rest over his, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. His skin was cold, trembling real. "You know, I said quietly, I used to check that watch every time your father flew. He said time kept him steady. Maybe it'll do the same for you." He swallowed hard. "Mom, did you ever stop loving me?" I looked at him, this broken man, this frightened child, this stranger I once raised. "No," I said. "But I stopped recognizing you for a while." The guard knocked on the door. 2 minutes. I stood, adjusting my coat. Andrew looked up, panic flickering in his eyes. "Wait, Mom, will you come back?" "I will," I said. "But not as your rescuer, as your witness." He nodded, tears blurring his vision. "I understand." I reached for the box and closed it gently around the watch. "No," I said. "You keep it." As I turned to leave, I felt his gaze follow me, the weight of guilt, the ache of realization. Behind me, the faint sound of metal against metal echoed the watch clasp closing around his wrist. That familiar click, steady, precise, filled the room like the sound of time resuming its course. At the doorway, I paused. He sat hunched over, shoulders shaking. For years, I had wanted him to cry. Now that he did, it didn't feel like victory, it felt like release. "Goodbye, Andrew," I said softly. He didn't answer. The only sound was his quiet sobbing and the steady ticking of a watch that had outlived every lie between us. Outside, the air was sharp with autumn. I walked toward the parking lot where Captain Brooks was waiting in his truck. Through the reflection of the window, I caught a glimpse of myself, older, scarred, but free. As the door shut behind me, I whispered to no one in particular. Time runs only one way, but sometimes it circles back to mercy. Then I started the engine and drove toward the horizon where the sea met the sky, not as a mother seeking justice, but as a woman, finally at peace with what justice had already given. The ocean outside my new office window breathed like a living thing, calm, rhythmic, forgiving. It was the same sea that once tried to swallow me whole, and now it whispered like an old friend. Funny how survival changes your relationship with water. I dipped my pen into the ink, the scratch of the nib against paper steady as a heartbeat. A name flowed onto the document, deliberate and sure, Langston Ocean's Foundation. The tagline beneath it read, "For women, rebuilding from the wreckage." I looked at the signature. then at the waves beyond the glass, and said softly to myself, "Paperwork speaks." Again. A year had passed since the investigation. Andrew was in rehabilitation, not prison, a mercy arranged through full cooperation with the SEC and the FBI. Brianna, on the other hand, had traded her designer gowns for orange jumpsuits. Justice wasn't always symmetrical, but it was finally visible. And me, I had no empire left to rule, only one, to rebuild this time from purpose, not pride. The foundation occupied a modest building near the Portland Marina with an open office that smelled faintly of coffee salt air and new beginnings. We had 10 staff members, most women over 45 each, with a story that could fill a novel. Divorced, bankrupt, widowed, laid off, forgotten, now all of them architects of something better. At the center of it all sat a brass plaque on the wall, the Langston Oceans Foundation, founded by Margaret Langston. 70 dedicated to women who refused to sink. Noah was there too, fresh-faced, still idealistic, typing so fast you could hear the future in every keystroke. He was now the foundation's first scholarship recipient, pursuing a degree in digital forensics. He'd earned it, of course. Without his tech genius, none of the evidence that saved me and buried Brianna would have surfaced. That morning, he walked into my office with 2 coffees and a grin. "Your 10 a.m. donor meeting confirmed," he said, "and before you ask yes, I updated the firewall." I smiled. "You're worth every scholarship dollar." He shrugged. "Guess I'm part of the Langston legacy now." I handed him a folder. "Correction, you're part of its future." Out on the pier, Captain Brooks supervised a group of new volunteers inspecting donated fishing vessels. His old Coast Guard jacket flapped in the wind, the back patched with a stitched phrase I'd given him as a joke, "Chief Security Officer, Yacht Theft Prevention Division." When I walked down to greet him, he saluted with mock seriousness. "Morning, Admiral." "Morning, Captain," I replied, still making sure no one's planning an oceanic heist. He winked. "Ma'am, if they do, I'll be the first to confiscate the champagne." I laughed, a full, unguarded laugh that tasted like sunlight. Good. Because now my team doesn't steal yachts, they build ships. He raised an eyebrow. "Ships of women, huh? Exactly. And this time, no one's getting pushed overboard." Later that afternoon, we hosted our first mentorship workshop, Second Chances, First Steps. The room filled with voices, some confident, some trembling, all hopeful. One woman, Denise, stood up and said through tears, "I thought 48 was too old to start again, but seeing you here, Miss Langston, it feels possible." I didn't correct her when she called me Miss Langston. Titles didn't matter anymore, only what we built from what was left. After the workshop, I sat by the window, notebook open, listening to the steady rhythm of the sea. The tide came in, the tide went out, like breath, like forgiveness, like the long process of becoming whole again. On the desk lay a photo of Andrew taken last month. He was volunteering at a community center teaching underprivileged teens how to repair small engines. His letter came folded beneath it. "Mom, it read you once told me leadership was stewardship. I finally understand what that means. I'm building something small but honest. I hope one day you'll visit." I traced the signature with my thumb. "Maybe I will, son. Maybe I will." Brooks knocked on the door, interrupting the quiet. "Mail just came in," he said, handing me a thick envelope. "Looks official." Inside was a letter from the state tax-exempt status approval for the foundation. At the bottom, a printed seal, embossed and perfect. "Congratulations," Brooks said, leaning against the doorframe. "You've gone from drowning to dockside royalty." I smiled. "No crowns this time, just anchor chains." He chuckled. "Still poetic as ever." "Poetry's cheaper than therapy," I replied. As the sun began to dip, I signed the final page of the foundation's charter. The sound of the pen scratching paper mingled with the soft crashing of waves outside. It was the same motif that had haunted me for months, the sound of bureaucracy, of restoration of justice that required ink, not revenge. Every stroke of the pen was a victory, quiet but certain. Because in the end, paperwork still speaks louder than greed. At dusk, the team gathered on the pier for a small celebration. No fireworks this time, just paper lanterns, shaped like tiny boats, each carrying a handwritten wish. Noah lit one, whispering, "For the women who start over." Brooks lit another, "For the ones who don't sink." And I, holding mine close to the flame, said softly, "For the truth that floats no matter how deep it's buried." We released them together. The lanterns drifted across the water, reflections trembling in the tide, little lights of survival bobbing toward the horizon. When the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind, listening to the waves slapping gently against the dock. The sea no longer frightened me. It reminded me who I was. From behind, Brooks called out, "You look peaceful, Margaret." "I am," I said. "For the first time, I'm building something no one can steal." He nodded. "You always were a builder." "Maybe," I said. "But now I build without blood." As the last lantern disappeared into the dark, I closed my notebook, feeling the weight of both endings and beginnings. I thought of the watch ticking on Andrew's wrist, of Brianna's silence of the empire that collapsed to make way for something more human. The ocean sighed against the pier, timeless and patient. I whispered to it, half promise, half prayer. They threw me to the sea, but the sea threw me back wiser. Then I turned off the lights in the office and walked away, leaving behind the faint echo of two sounds that had become my anthem, the crash of waves and the scratch of a pen. The courthouse smelled of old paper and newer lies. Marble floors gleamed under the flash of cameras. Reporters swarmed like gulls before a storm, their microphones thrust forward, eager to catch every crack in someone's reputation. Inside courtroom 4B, the air was heavy part, perfume part, panic. I sat quietly in the second row, pearl earrings, navy suit, hair pinned with precision. No theatrics, no tears, just presence. After everything, the yacht, the forged will, the months of investigation today wasn't about rage. It was about truth, having its day in daylight. At the front of the courtroom, Brianna Langston took her seat beside her defense attorney, her posture elegant, her expression polished to pity. She wore beige, the color of innocence people choose when they've run out of real purity. When the judge entered, everyone rose. "Be seated," he said. The trial had dragged for weeks, but this was the day that mattered, the day of evidence presentation, the day of reckoning. Mr. Chen stood at the prosecution table, posture calm, voice steady. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, the state would like to present final Exhibit 47 digital recording retrieved from the Yacht Elysium on the night of June 12th. Brianna's head snapped toward him, her composure trembling for the first time. The lights dimmed, a large screen flickered to life, static, then moonlight. A woman's voice, silky and venomous. "Say hi to the sharks." The courtroom froze. The next sound was a splash, muffled, brutal final. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Reporters scribbled frantically. The defense attorney paled. The clip ended abruptly, the silence that followed louder than any scream. Brianna tried to stand, but the bailiff held her shoulder. "That audio," she stammered, her voice shrill. "It's doctored." "That's not," Mr. Chen didn't even flinch. "The timestamp matches GPS data from the yacht security system." The voice was confirmed by a forensic analyst as belonging to the defendant. He turned toward the jury, letting the weight of his next line settle like an anchor intent. Malice. Premeditation. Brianna's lips trembled. She whispered something to her lawyer, who leaned away slightly, as if the distance might keep him clean. Across the aisle, Andrew sat, hunched, his hands clasped tightly, face pale. He'd agreed to testify in exchange for partial leniency, but the guilt still clung to him like salt water. He didn't look at me, not yet, but I could feel the tremor in his chest from across the room. When the judge allowed him to speak, his voice broke halfway through. "She told me it was an accident," he said, "that Mom slipped, but I heard her laugh afterward." Gasps filled the room. One juror covered her mouth, another shook his head. Brianna exploded. "You liar, you were in on it!" "Order," the judge thundered, gavel striking wood like lightning. The bailiff stepped forward. Brianna sank back into her chair, eyes darting wildly toward the exits, the cameras, the flashing lights searching for any angle that could still love her. Mr. Chen closed his folder, his tone soft but surgical. Mrs. Langston, you spent years building a public image of philanthropy, generosity, and grace. But power without integrity is just theater. You wanted to play a role. Today you got your stage." He stepped aside, letting the silence echo. Every eye turned to Brianna. Her chin quivered, and then came the final act tears. She folded her hands, voice trembling with fake fragility. "I never meant for any of this," she said. "Andrew pressured me. I was scared. I loved his mother. She was like family." Her lawyer nodded along like a marionette, agreeing with its puppeteer. But the jury didn't move. Not one face softened. Because truth, once heard, has a sound that can't be unheard. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Is that your statement, Mrs. Langston?" She nodded. "Then the court will proceed with sentencing." My heartbeat slowed. The gavel rose. For the crimes of fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and attempted murder, this court finds the defendant, Brianna Langston, guilty on all counts. The room erupted. Camera flashes burst like gunfire. Reporters shouted questions. The judge's voice cut through it all. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal custody, with immediate asset forfeiture to victims of the Langston biopharma fraud. The sound of handcuffs snapped through the noise, sharp metallic final. Brianna turned in her seat, searching for me. When our eyes met, she tried one last weapon, pity. But I'd seen enough ocean storms to recognize crocodile tears. I didn't say a word. I simply looked back, steady and unblinking, the way you look at something already gone. Outside the courthouse, the sky was the color of headlines, white-hot, relentless. Photographers shouted, "Mrs. Langston, how does it feel to see justice? Do you forgive your son? Is it true you're funding a new foundation?" I paused at the top of the courthouse steps. Microphones jutted like bayonets. I smiled faintly and said, "They wanted fame. They got it, just not the kind you frame." Laughter and camera clicks erupted behind me as I walked toward the waiting car. Mr. Chen held the door open, his tone casual but proud. "How does victory feel?" "Quiet," I said, "exactly how it should." As we drove away, the courthouse faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the horizon, blue, endless, unthreatening. I thought of the waves that had tried to claim me once and how I'd come back with something stronger than revenge evidence. Paper, proof, patience, justice. I'd learned doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs. Later that night, the news played the footage again, Brianna's face frozen mid-scream, caught in the flash of 10,000 cameras. The caption beneath her read, "Langston heiress, sentenced, the empire that sank itself." I turned off the television, letting the silence reclaim the room. Through the open window, I could hear the waves breaking against the pier, steady, rhythmic, unbothered by human pride. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered into the stillness. They thought the ocean would drown me, but I learned to float. Then I sat back, watching the moonlight shimmer across the water and let the sound of the sea wash away the last trace of their names. 4 months later, the sea had softened. The storms that once roared outside my window now whispered instead, lapping gently against the shore, as if apologizing for the past. I sat in my old armchair, the one that had survived the flood of both saltwater and betrayal, its worn leather molded to my frame like an embrace from time itself. The morning light spilled through the half-open curtains, warm and golden, cutting across the living room floor in quiet ribbons. Dust motes floated like tiny memories. Somewhere in the distance, gulls called harsh, honest creatures that took nothing they didn't need. The ocean view stretched endlessly beyond the glass, a horizon stitched with forgiveness. On the small table beside me lay 3 things: a framed photograph, a steaming cup of tea, and a single seashell polished smooth by the tide. The photograph was old, the edges, curling colors fading, but its truth never changed. It showed Robert, my late husband, his arm around me, our son Andrew, grinning between us, barely 8 years old. We were standing on the deck of our first sailboat, the Mariner's Grace. I remembered that day vividly, Robert teaching Andrew how to tie a knot, how to read the wind, how to respect something as vast and unpredictable as the sea. Back then, Andrew had laughed and said, "If I fall, the ocean will catch me." And Robert replied, "Only if you learn to swim." Now, 4 decades later, that memory returned like a tide, gentle but unrelenting. I ran my fingers along the edge of the photo, the faint smell of salt drifting in from the open window. The same window I'd once stared through in anger, grief, defiance. Today, it was simply peace. The foundation had grown faster than I expected. We'd opened 2 new chapters across the coast, one in Monterey, one in Cape May. Dozens of women rebuilding their lives, each one, proof that survival isn't the end. It's the beginning of purpose. Noah had graduated top of his class and now worked part-time managing cybersecurity for our donors. He still called every Sunday to check in. Captain Brooks was planning a small sailing trip for the team in spring. This time, he'd joked life vests for everyone, even you. I'd laughed then, and I laughed again thinking about it now. For someone who'd once been thrown to the sharks, I'd built quite a fleet. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, the same rhythm as the pocket watch I'd given Andrew. He sent me a letter last week. Not typed, handwritten. His penmanship was shaky, uncertain, but the words were clear. "Mom, I volunteer at the rehab center every day. It's not enough to make up for what I did, but it's a start. I'm trying to be the man Dad believed I could be. I hope you'll sail again one day. When you do, maybe let me help you fix the ropes." I'd read that line 3 times, and for the first time in years, I felt something thaw inside me. Forgiveness wasn't a wave that crashed all at once. It was a tide that returned, slowly reshaping the shore grain by grain. I rose from my chair and walked toward the porch, the wood creaking beneath my bare feet. The air smelled of salt and pine. Outside, the ocean stretched vast and endless, a mirror to everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. The same water that once swallowed me now reflected my peace. Its rhythm matched my breath. They pushed me to the sea. But the tide always brings truth home. From the porch railing, a wind chime of old silver keys tinkled softly, each one salvaged from a different part of my past life. The yacht, the mansion, the office, the vault. Now they hung here, repurposed, singing when the wind shifted. A symphony of lessons learned. The door creaked open behind me. Ms. Langston. It was Mia, one of the Foundation's new interns, barely 20, all energy and curiosity. Mr. Brooks says the new shipment of donated laptops just arrived. Should we start setting them up? Yes, I said, smiling, and remind him no more coffee after 3 p.m. last time he tried to rewire the modem. She laughed. He already broke one extension cord. Of course he did. I handed her the mug I'd been holding. Here, take this. You've earned a break more than I have. As she walked away, I glanced once more at the sea. The light shifted sunset, now streaks of crimson and gold melting into the horizon. The reflection caught the photograph again, igniting Robert's smile, Andrew's boyish joy. I whispered to them, to no one, to everyone. A house is built with walls, but legacy with choices. I thought of all the signatures, the papers, the ink, every yes and no that had rewritten my life. They were just choices, and each one brought me here, alive, calm, unafraid. As night fell, the waves grew darker, but not hostile. I pulled a blanket over my knees and stayed on the porch, listening. In the distance, the lighthouse beam swept across the water, its rhythm slow, patient, steady. A reminder that guidance doesn't always come from people. Sometimes it comes from persistence. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the tide blend with my heartbeat, not as a survivor, not as a victim, but as a witness to my own becoming. When I finally stood to go inside, I paused at the door and looked back once more. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, wide, ancient, and forgiving. It no longer scared me. It never really had. It only revealed what I hadn't wanted to see, that strength isn't about staying afloat. It's about trusting that even when you sink, you rise again, changed. Inside, I turned off the last lamp. The sound of waves filled the silence, steady and eternal. Then just before closing the door, I spoke to the sea, one last time, softly, almost lovingly. Thank you for bringing me back. They pushed me to the sea. But the tide always brings truth home. A house is built with walls, but legacy with choices. If you believe silence can still bring justice, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because some tides never stop returning, and some stories, no matter how deep they sink, always find their way home.